Abosheshe and Alafia, Ekurole, good afternoon, and Ekabo, welcome. Alright, I am Ifa Bemero, Adifranchu, Orisa Bemi, or Fahima Alibi, as some people know me. I would like to welcome you to the Ifa Orisa Community Discussion Program. Alright, I would like to open the program by first giving respects to Oludumare, the Most High. Open Nifun Olorun, Oludumare Oba Jiti, Mojiloni, Morobun Mary Aye, Iba Ila Orun, Iba Iwo Orun, Iba Ariwa, Iba Gusu, Iba Oba Igba Aye, Iba Orun Oke, Iba Baba, Iba Yeye, Iba Atiwo Orun, Iba She Igungun Kiki Igungun, Iba She Ori, Ori Inu, Ipori Atiwo Orun. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Okay, today's program is going to be about libation. But I want to give a reminder before I start that the intent of this program is to explain to viewers some of the challenges that our ancestors would have had when they were brought from Africa and had the religion of Christianity in whatever form imposed upon them. All right, as I've explained before, most of the Africans who came would have came as adults, and they would have already been practicing West African tradition. So they would have been able to continue privately practicing what they know and publicly practicing what was being imposed upon them in the form of religion. All right? Before I go deeply into the topic of libation, I want to read on the topic of sacrifice and offerings. I am going to read from one of the books by Osamara Ibi. This particular book explains in a very clear, simple manner what is sacrifice. Right? It is a religious concept that is very common in most religious practices. As I have explained many times before, Orisa is a tradition, and religion only forms a very minute portion of the cosmological concept of the Orisa tradition, or of the Ifa Orisa tradition. I'm going to read chapter 5 from the complete works of Orunmila by Mr. C. Osamara Ibi. Okay? Chapter 7 is the effects of sacrificial offerings on our lives. The ordinary dictionary definition of sacrifice is the offering of anything to a deity, a giving up or foregoing of some valued thing for the sake of something of greater value or having more pressing claim. Thus, it is heard, if thou preservest my life, thy sacrifice shall be. whatever a person desires to have in heaven or on earth involves some sacrifice or giving up of something. The simplest sacrifice one makes for anything is time. One sacrifices time and effort for whatever is worth having. Even the relatively simple task of begging involves the sacrifice of one's human pride and independence. How many things does one get from one's fellow man without begging for it, bribing for it, or making some prior atonement or gratification, even if it has to be promised in advance? When it comes, therefore, to benefits desired or won from the divinities, a great sacrifice is required. It is not enough to merely beg for such benefits or favors. It must involve physical sacrifice. There are sacrifices involving offerings of animate or inanimate objects. When one desires any form of progress or gain, it must involve some sort of investment. A farmer sacrifices part of his seeds for planting in the following year in order to reap a harvest at the end of the year. A trader invests his savings or borrowed funds in his business in order to realize the profit that will discharge his recurrent commitments. Were you able to share it? In the same way, when one deals in the sphere of divinities, one must give them what they want in order to beseech them to come to one's aid. Hence, the sheet anchor of the Ifa tradition is the making of sacrifice. Oren Miller says, sacrifice is deliverance. No matter what problems one may have at any time, if one promptly makes the sacrifice prescribed at divination, there must surely be a relief. Oren Miller reveals that before anyone leaves heaven for the world, he is advised to obtain clearance from the guiding deities. If he abides by the advice given to make sacrifice, he will find the world an easy abode. All right, and with that, I would stop reading from the book, and I would go now into today's lesson. All right, and as I said earlier, the lesson today is concerning what is called libation. All right, but before I get into libation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the etymological definitions of the words that I'm going to use while teaching this particular lesson. All right, the first word that I'm going to look at is the word communion. All right, and again, I'm going to break it into its parts using etymology. So for those who've heard me mention etymology before, this might actually be a good lesson where I'm going to demonstrate how etymology is used to find out the true, original, historic or chronological meaning of any word that exists, that is a part of the language we speak. Now, the word communion, the root of the word is coma. I'm sure you have heard the term before when they say somebody went into a coma, or they say a person was comatose. So we have an idea of what that term coma could possibly mean. Now, the same word coma is also pronounced comma. Yes, believe it or not, the same word coma is the same word comma. Yes. In Greek, the origin of the word is spelled Komma. All right? And it means to cut off. So when a person goes into a coma, their normal functioning is ceased. So they become cut off from what we refer to as normal functions or normalcy. All right? And when we use a comma in a sentence, it is to close off or to cut or to complete one idea or one sentence. I hope you are able to see the relationship. So the word comma or coma means to cut off in both Latin as well as in Greek. But not only does it imply to cut off, but it implies to cut off a piece. Okay? So, when we go now to the word communion, we are going to discover that it has to do with sharing. It has to do with participation. It has to do with spiritual fellowship. All right? And one of the examples they use of a phrase was the sacrament of the Lord's Supper as an example of communion. Now, the word communion could be found in Old French as communing, and it could be found in Latin as communio. Right? Now, how do you link the word communion to the word coma? Well, the word coma talk about cutting off a piece. So a community would be built around a sharing group that has been separated from the general group of a particular thing. I would give an example. A very good example would be animals. Various animals live in their own community that makes them distinct from other groups of, or other classes also of animals, where they would have a particular description, a particular behavior, and particular patterns. They would live in a particular environment. They would have a particular food source, and that is what separates them from the other animals. In like manner, when we make reference to a community of people like the Orisa community, we are speaking about a particular group of people who gets together to fulfill a particular common goal or interest. Okay? Now, the term community is generally used, again, to refer to a group of people who share a common goal, a common interest, like that. For example, right here in Trinidad, community is used by national security when they talk about community leader. And that is generally used to refer to organized crime and people who are involved, groups that are involved in those type of activities. So that would be another example of the use of the word community. All right, in the Orisa community, we have certain cosmological principles that we use. They are referred to as Odus, O-D-U-S, plural, Odu, singular. We have 16 principal Odus that formulate the foundation of the structure of Ifa. Ifa is based on the binary system, or the principles of the binary system. The regular binary system that we use in mathematics. This was the contribution of our people. Computers uses the binary system, where 0 and 1 are the two symbols that represents the different positions. Among the 16 principal Odus that we use, from those basic 16, we are able to produce 356 different permutations. Associated to the 356 permutation are principles and concepts that rules our cosmological deals, which is our value system, as well as the way we relate to life and to the realities. Today, I want to discuss one of the 16 principal Odu, which is the very first, which would sort of work as an introduction to what I just mentioned about community, and is also going to tie us into libation. The first principal Odu is called Ogbe, which is a Yoruba word. From the word Ogbe, we get the word O-Egbe. The word Egbe is in reference to a community. But in this specific instance that I'm going to demonstrate, we use the term O-Egbe in relation to our ancestors, those who came before us. A lot of people ascribe a lot of superstition to the term ancestors. There is no superstition with the term ancestor. The term ancestor is simply our biological relatives who predated us, those who came and lived just like we are living on this planet, and in some case in the same locality as yourself. An example would be your grandparents or your great-grandparents if your parents are not alive. These are the people we refer to as our ancestors. In the Orisa tradition, we do not worship ancestors. You would hear some people refer to it as ancestral worship. That's a very inaccurate thing. What we do is we venerate and we pay respects to our ancestors, which I think is only fair, seeing that they are the ones who are responsible for our current existence. They are the ones who are responsible in many cases for our social status. They are the ones also responsible for our education, because much of what we inherited from our parents, they inherited from their parents. So whatever condition in life you have, whatever you know of your own history, would have been influenced by those who came before you. It is very, very important, particularly for people who are into families, to be able to recall the history of their family to their children and their grandchildren. And the reason for that is many times for people to have a sense of self-identity, they must be able to link themselves to a family, which is the first unit, and a community. All right? So I'm going to read for you what the very first principle called Ogbe speaks about. Ogbe, when translated, The source I used it from the Bantus, the South Africans, and I also use it from our direct ancestors who are mainly the West Africans. Right? In future broadcasts or streams, I would explain the indigenous link between many of us in the Americas and those from West Africa who came to the Americas long before slavery. But today's show is only about libation and communing with our ancestors via rituals. And the first one I'm going to discuss is libation. Ogbe reads, his relatives has gathered to bless and support opportunities for fortune due to the support of his familial Egbe. And as I've explained before, the term Egbe refers to a society, a group, or a community. Let me continue reading. Will be guided and directed to achieve new knowledge and will have success with new ventures. Will be bestowed with beginner's luck. All right. It was very clear, but I want to just elaborate maybe on 1 or 2 points that was mentioned here. Having the blessing and the support of one's ancestors is very, very important. Why? Because these are the things that builds the confidence in a person. Many of us could remember growing up and our parents encouraging us to do particular things, which we probably was doubtful about or didn't have enough confidence, or we didn't think we could achieve it or accomplish it. But in retrospect, we saw the importance of their support, and we saw the importance of them encouraging us to do these things that eventually led to our development, advancement, and progress. I would give one example. I could remember when my baby, that is my last daughter, but she's a grown adult now, started off riding her bike with her training wheels. And you know, the normal process, you want to raise up the training wheel to allow the child to be able to ride the bike. But what you do as the parent is you run behind the child and you hold on to the bike and you allow the child to pedal and to guide the bike. Now, what happened? After a while of the child knowing that you are there holding that bike, the child developed confidence in what they are doing. They would say, Daddy, you're doing good. And you would be like, yeah, you know, they mightn't be doing too good, but to build the confidence, you would, yeah, you're doing good. And after a while of telling them they're doing good and building their confidence, then they develop the sense of balance. They develop their sense of control. They develop their sense of speed. And eventually, you running behind the bike. Eventually, I stopped holding the bike for my daughter, but I kept running behind her. So she would think I was holding the bike. And eventually, she was able to ride without me running behind the bike and holding. So saying that to say, it is very, very, very important for us to always connect with the elders who eventually transition to the other stage of life, which we refer to as death. You know, but I strongly, based on the tradition of understanding of these things, I have learned over time that no one dies. What we do is we graduate to another phase of our development. We go to a place where all the others who lived before us went to. All right? These things are called different names, but I'm not That again, that is not today's lesson. So now I'm going to go into the word libation, which is the lesson for today. The word libation could be found in both French and in Latin. And basically they were borrowed into English from those two languages. The word libation means to taste or to pour forth. All right? So as I mentioned, I'm going to explain a little bit about the language and etymology so that we could understand how it is applied to taking things apart so we have a better intellectual understanding of what some words actually originally meant and how these loan words have contributed to the development of the language we speak. The word libation in Latin is libatio. In French is libari. All right? And from the French and the Latin, it means taste and it means to pour as offering. It could also be found in Greek as libein, which means to pour drops by drop, drop by drop. All right? Now, the same word could be found in Middle English, the part of the word ation. Now, in English, tion is often used as a suffix. It's added to the end of a word, and the word it's added to would have a root, which is actually the source from which the word was developed. All right, some words have a prefix also, but today, because we're looking at libation, we're looking at the suffix tion or ion that is added to the end of the word. All right? Now, the word libation has a stem, which is the addition to it on the end, that we refer to as a suffix. So the stem is the part that is added to the root, and in this case we refer to it as a suffix. Now, interesting, in the word libation, li is used in Chinese as a unit of measure. Right? So, with the word libation, we find that at the beginning. Now, the portion of the word libate, L-I-B-A actually is the word, because the T-I-O-N is the added on part, or the stem, or the suffix. All right? So the word would be L-I-B-A, that is left as being the root part of it. The L-I-B would be like a cajole or a baton, or an instrument that is used to punish or to defend. So there might be another degree to the actual definitions that could be used, because one of the important things that people must know when we talk about etymology is that a lot of words, depending on how they are used, they take on a slightly different meaning. A word by itself could represent a particular idea. However, depending on the family of words used around it, it would give meaning, or it would expand that particular word's idea. All right? So, I want to just step back now to Ogbe and the whole binary idea. All right? Ogbe represents the first of the principal 16 odus. The permutation that is associated to it, in the case of a system called Merindalogon, which has to do with the number 16 also. It represents when all is facing upwards. That's the permutation. This permutation can be found mathematically with one leg having 4 parts, but the calculation, the maximum part of the calculation, works out to the number 8, which is 2 to the power 3, which is binary. But I don't want to go too deep into that. But we're going to go now into the way in which our West African tradition, which is the Orisa tradition, interprets and apply libation. And also at some point I'm going to go also into its presence in Christianity, because again the program is geared to show the challenges that our ancestors had coming from a West African culture and having Christianity imposed on them. They were able to see and relate to certain Christian practices that they knew was a part of them and the practices they had in Africa. All right? Now, libation is a patrimonial ritual used in Africa. The libation is used to honor. I want you all to listen to the words. There is nothing here that implies worship. To honor and to please the Creator. The Orishas, the ancestors, present and non-present human beings as well. I want you all to get that. So the ritual is to honor, not worship. All right? You would hear me using the term Orisa repeatedly. Let me just take the time off to explain that too a little bit. An Orisa is a deified elder that has transitioned. We believe in our culture and tradition that persons who have lived as human beings and have made outstanding contributions to our community and to our culture, that they should be recognized for what they do. These persons who did very outstanding things are referred to or elevated to the level of what we refer to as Orisa. So even by using the very term Orisa, I am referring to our ancestors. Whether it's Shango, Ogun, whoever it is, they once lived as human beings. And because of their contribution, we choose to recognize them and to elevate them to a particular status. So that is what I mean when you hear me use the term Orisa. All right, if I am referring to divinities that were never human beings, but were always as an energy form that never manifested as a man or woman, I would use the term Iromole. Okay, which is something, another Yoruba word that describes energies that came but not as humans. All right, so let me just continue in defining the African interpretation of libation and what it means. This ritual is practiced in many parts of the world, but I'm giving you the African worldview. We are not the only people who practice libation as a form of honor. All right? The liberator who performs the ritual presents with this significant ceremony the recognition and proclamation of existence together with the implicit acceptance of the higher powers, and in this way requesting and offering their blessings, either for a particular individual or a group, to repair the imbalance or cleaning, as some people put it, in a person, a family, or in the physical environment itself, as well as to nullify the perceived threat or said imbalance, to obtain blessings for a project that is about to be started, or for one that has already started, or for the completion of a project. So I want you all to understand, the ritual of libation is to honor. However, it is a ritual where one pays this honor and this respect to those who have already been departed. It is a form of respect. I would like to know, when I die, or when I transition rather, that my great-great-great-grandchildren would be able to remember or hear who the great-great-grandfather was and the type of human being that he was. So we all try to live a particular way so that the history that we created that we create for ourselves will be well for the future generations to hear good reports of us. All right? So now, this is the part where I'm going to go and I'm going to make references to the Bible. All right? Because our ancestors were taught this, and our ancestors had to practice this involuntarily, not voluntarily. As I've explained before on one of the previous streams, my maternal grandmother had to declare herself a Catholic in order to get us to attend the Roman Catholic schools. She was Orisa. Okay, she arrived here as that. Her sisters arrived here at that, and two of her sisters had churches. One in Laventille and one in Laborie. Okay? Some people were more radical, some were less. But a lot of our ancestors did what they have to do to ensure that we could experience social mobility, and so that we could have become assimilated, here the word I'm using, into this diasporic colonized system. All right? And because of that, many of us today are professionals, doctors, lawyers, and with various type of professions because of the sacrifices our ancestors made. So we should honor them. We should respect them. All right? And in so doing, we are now establishing a pattern that we too, when we transition, that we would also be honored and respected. All right? Now, the first Bible quote that I'm going to use, for those, again, who are familiar with the Bible, and those who are not, you can write down the verses and you can go and look at them yourself in full, because I'm not going to go through every detail for all of them. I'm just going to read the part that mentions libation. Okay? The first scripture is Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 13. All right? In this verse, it mentions a food offering presented to the Lord, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin. Okay? A drink offering, by definition, is a libation. So in the book of Leviticus chapter 23 and 13, the Hebrew people, who are also African, and as I mentioned in the last stream, this is not debatable anymore because of the president of Russia. and the information that he has made public before the world, where it is now open. Anyone could visit Russia and go to the museum and see the images of Jesus, or Yeshua, some people say, and all the messiahs, all the prophets, all the disciples, his mother, him. You can go see all of it. They are Africans. That's no question anymore. So now when I'm making reference to what is written in the book called the Bible, these things are referring to our very own African people. All right? Whether it doesn't matter what they are called. Because we could go on and on debating about what is our suitable name, whether it's Alkebulanese, whether it's this, whether it's that. Not important. What is important is that we know it is our people. The second scripture is Leviticus 23 and verse 18. It says, 1 young bull, 2 rams, they will be burnt offering to the Lord, together with their grain offering and drink offering as food offering, and right, the aroma or whatever to the Lord. All right. So again, this year represents, in part, the burning of animals together with a drink offering. Last stream I dealt with ashes and I spoke about the burnt offerings. I gave all the readings and I explained the scientific aspect of such a practice. All right, I mentioned the German who was credited for developing biochemistry and was using the same principles our ancestors used for bats and for akoshe in order to improve the health of individuals. The salt containing the mineral and the trace element, and the blood working as a buffer solution to balance the pH. I mentioned all of that last week. So for those who have missed the stream, please avail yourself. It's on the groups and it's on my personal timeline, that you would understand what was the significance of them burning this young cow and these rams and using the ashes in rituals. All right, let me continue. The next portion of scripture is Numbers chapter 28 and verse 7, which reads, the accompanying drink offering is to be 1/4 of a hin of fermented drink with each lamb. Okay? Pour out the drink offering to the Lord at the sanctuary. Okay, so at the altar, the drink offering, which is of a fermented beverage, is to be poured there. All right, and I want to mention one thing that I mentioned in the last stream. The ashes that I mentioned was made during Lent from a vestment, a rough vestment of goat hair that is burnt, and that ashes is used for purification at the end of the Lenten season. All right, let me go back. The next scripture is Exodus chapter 29 verses 40. It reads, the finest flour is to be mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil from pressed olive, so in other words, olive oil, and 1/4 of a hin of wine as a drink offering. So again, the drink offering is a libation. Today we still practice this in African tradition. And the Africans I'm reading about here in the Bible practiced it. So those of us who would come across the term drink offering and all of that, in Christianity, you should know it's libation and it's an African practice and tradition. All right? The next one is Numbers 6 and 15. It says, together with the grain offering and drink offering and a basket of bread made with the finest flour and without yeast, thin loaves with olive oil mixed in, thick loaves, sorry, with olive oil mixed in, and thin loaves brushed with olive oil. All right. Many of these traditions are still practiced today in Thanksgiving, the bread and the sweet bread and all of that. It is practiced as an African tradition. Okay? I'm going on now. I'm going to 2 Kings chapter 16 and verse 15 to 17. Please take notes for those who study the Bible, and you could go and look and see I didn't make none of this stuff up. I ain't that good. My father was the preacher. Right? I follow the tradition of those before my father, because his mother was spiritual Baptist, and I used to go to her Thanksgiving at her home every summer or every August. Right? All my older siblings could attest to this. I ain't making nothing up. All right, 2 Kings 16, 15 to 17. All right, which was the instruction given by King Ahaz. On the large new altar, offer the morning burnt offering and the evening grain offering, and the offerings of the people of the land, and their grain offering and their drink offering. Splash against this altar the blood of all the burnt offering and sacrifices. But I will use the bronze altar for guidance. This one needs a little explaining, and I am going to explain it. The animals that were burnt to produce the acid for the ritual, they were offered as what in African tradition we call ebo. E-B-O. So when the animals are slaughtered, the blood is drained off. The Jewish people, the word ish means to be like. So by saying Jewish, they are telling us they are not Jews. They are telling us they are like the Jews, because they know who the Jews are, and they know it's not them. But let me continue. During the ebo process, the blood is extracted from the animal. In some cases, it's collected in a basin. In some cases, it's poured at the edifice of a particular energy. So the blood that they mention in here that was collected from the burnt offerings is to be thrown onto the altar. That's the first thing I want to explain. The second thing that I want to explain is that he mentioned that he would use the bronze altar for guidance. Many Christians would not know what this is, because most of the pastors and the theologians and the people who are supposed to be the ones deciphering these things, unfortunately, many of them do not have an understanding. The bronze altar that he speaks of here is the breastplate that the priests, the high priests, used to wear. They are not the only persons who used to wear it. He said here that he was going to use it for guidance. Breastplate is normally was used as a protection for fighting war. But the breastplate that was used by the chief priest of Israel was used for divination. That's what he means when he said he's going to use it for guidance. The breastplate carried 12 movable stones, and it also carried something called a Urim and a Thummim. The breastplate with the 12 movable stones, today we African people still have that tool. In Hebrew, they call it an ephod. In Yoruba, it's called an open ephah. The Urim and the Thummim is used by us today. It is called Igbo, where we use different things to determine if our answer is yes or no. Again, these things could be investigated, and I want everybody not to take anything I have to say. I want you to go and verify it. This is what's going to separate me from the others. I'm not here to tell you accept anything I say. I want you to take the time off to go and examine every word that I've said. In Exodus chapter 28, from verses 6 to 12, give all of the instruction and the details for the building of the ephod. What we know is it's not 12, as in the 12th tribe of Israel. What we know is 16 foundational or principal odus. In reading Exodus 28, 6 to 12, you're going to see a lot of different details about what is to be inscribed here and what is to be inscribed there and all these things. They also use the permutations. Okay? The Jewish rabbis would claim that the alphabet, which is block type Hebrew, which is what they use today, in the ancient time, it was called Amharic, and it was not as structured like the letters in our alphabet. But what they call Hebrew today is Low German and Amharic joined together, and it's called Yiddish. So you would hear them talking about seals and characters when you're reading Exodus, that they would draw and carve it in and use gold writings and use gold to build these edifices and these plates. Okay? But what they are making reference to and referring to as an ephod, for members of our community, you would know it to be an open ephod. You would know it to be a divination plate with all the designs going all the way around it. Okay? With the messenger on the top, or who we call Yeshu. Alright? So, the ephod, which is Hebrew, is generally, beside being made of metal, in some cases you're going to find it made with a gird of cloth for a priest, or a cover, an overlay. Alright, but this script here gives you all the details of how it was, different ways that it was prepared. Right, I mentioned the Urim and the Thummim, which are tools used to go deep into finding answers. Again, it's part of our tradition. So our ancestors were able to make these comparisons to what they know to what was imposed on them. So basically, this ends today's lesson. All right, so we got a little bit about etymology and understanding the origins of words and how they are used, how they are modified, and how they are loaned from the Romance languages, and how these loan words create new words in English that we use. All right. Now, normally what I would do is I have a series of etymology dictionaries that I use. So any person wanting to do any real deep or professional type of research and come into a clear understanding of any material that you read, I would suggest you get yourself a couple of etymology dictionaries. Right? Whatever profession you may have, every profession has its own lexicon or its own language. So this is why you have law dictionaries. This is why you have different type of scientific dictionaries. The reason for that is so that for a person to be able to fluently use and comprehend the language of any scientific discipline or any academic discipline, it is necessary for deep understanding to have etymology dictionaries or lexicon dictionaries for the particular study. All right, and with that, I would like to close off today's program. I would like to thank all the people for coming in and spending the little time to learn about the African tradition and the aspects of it that was our ancestors was able to identify in Christianity, which was imposed on them. We are now living in a time where we are free people and we are no longer under the compulsion to follow anything. I am not saying to follow African tradition, I'm not saying to follow Christianity, but what I would say is that we need to know who we are. We need to know who our ancestors were, and we need to recognize them so that our future generations would be confident, would be strong, and that they would be able to face all of the challenges with the support of those who came before them. Okay, and with that, I would like to give this quotation: you do good, you do it for yourself. And you do bad, you do it for yourself. And to explain a little bit, yourself doesn't only mean you, the individual. It also means all your generations to come after you. So if you do bad, you're doing it for them too. And if you do good, you're doing it for them. I'm blessed. I had good parents who did a lot of good. And because of the good that they have done, my life has been blessed. So again, I'd like to say, Odabo, see you next time. And may Oludumare, the Most High, bless you, bless your children, bless your family, bless your household, bless your community, and may Oludumare bless the nation.